The casket was made of oak. I remember that detail because I had chosen it myself. The funeral home on Livernois gave me 3 options. I chose the oak one because it was the heaviest. I thought if it was heavy enough, it would feel permanent. Like something that could hold the weight of what had happened. Marcus was 12 years old. His mother had asked me to say the final prayer. She was sitting in the 3rd row, wearing the blue dress she wore every Sunday, and she was not crying. She had already run out of tears 3 days before. She just sat there, very still, the way people sit when they have accepted something that should never be accepted. I stood behind that pulpit. I looked down at that oak casket. And I thought about the ribbon. The yellow ribbon I had cut with a pair of silver scissors on a Tuesday morning in September of 1987. The cameras were there. I was smiling. The franchise manager shook my hand. By the end of this you will have to decide which side of that ribbon you stand on. My name is Reverend James Calloway. And this is the story they left out of every history book about Detroit. I came to this city in the summer of 1965. I was 23 years old, fresh out of the Detroit Bible College on Woodward Avenue, assigned to a small Baptist congregation on 12th Street, 74 members, 1 broken organ, and a furnace that stopped working every January. 12th Street, in those days, was alive. They were hardware stores run by men who knew your father's name. There were 2 grocers within 4 blocks, Mr. Henderson's on the corner, and the East Side Market, which had been there since 1941. On Sunday mornings, the whole block smelled like frying fish and hair grease and something close to joy. Then came the summer of 1967. July 23rd. 4 in the morning. A police raid on an unlicensed drinking club on 12th Street, 12 people arrested, a crowd gathered, and within hours, the city was burning. 43 people died. More than 2,000 buildings destroyed. But here is the part they always leave out of the history books. The fires did not kill 12th Street. What killed 12th Street was what happened after the fires went out. The insurance companies came first not to pay, but to deny. Mr. Henderson filed a claim for $47,000 in damages to his store. He received a letter 6 weeks later explaining that his policy had been retroactively reclassified. He never reopened. Then the grocery chains left. Kroger, A&P, Federal stores. One by one, they announced relocations to the suburbs. They called it a business decision. We called it what it was. By the spring of 1968, there was not a single full-service grocery store within 2 miles of my church. And people were hungry. I want you to understand what hunger looks like in a city. Not the hunger of missing one meal. The hunger that lives in a neighborhood for months. The hunger where mothers start cutting sandwiches in thirds instead of halves. Where the deacons bring canned goods to Sunday service and stack them in the back of the sanctuary like a food bank. Because that is what we had become. Chapter 1. The Pathway of Kapitali was 26 years old. I had been trained to preach the gospel. I had not been trained for this. April 4th, 1968. Martin Luther King was shot dead in Memphis, Tennessee. I remember exactly where I was. I was at my desk, writing a sermon about the book of Ruth about faithfulness in the time of famine. Someone knocked on my office door and told me. I sat there for a long time without moving. Then I picked up the phone and called every pastor I knew. Because I understood, in that moment, that no one was coming to save us. Not the government. Not the corporations. Not the kind white liberals who had marched with us and then gone home to their houses in Dearborn. We had to build something ourselves. And here is what I had. 74 congregation members. A building with 4 walls and a furnace that worked 8 months out of 12. And a God who had never once let me preach to an empty room. That was the year I first heard the name Herman Petty. Herman Petty was a black man from Chicago's South Side who had, in December of 1968, opened the first McDonald's franchise owned and operated by a black man in the history of the United States. He had fought for that franchise for 2 years. McDonald's corporate did not want to give it to him. They told him the neighborhood was too risky, the customer base too unstable. He opened anyway. Within 18 months, his location was the highest grossing McDonald's in the entire Chicago region. Do you know what that number meant not just to Herman Petty, but to every black pastor in every burned-out city in America? It meant a pathway. In 1969, President Nixon signed Executive Order 11,458, creating the Office of Minority Business Enterprise. Black capitalism, the idea that economic ownership, not just civil rights legislation, was the road to liberation. The franchise model became the mechanism. The church became the infrastructure. I believed in it. Completely. Without reservation. Because I had stood in front of families who could not feed their children. Because I had watched the grocery store sit empty for 3 years while my congregation drove 6 miles to buy milk. Because when the Bethel AME Church on the east side opened their fellowship hall for a franchise orientation meeting in 1972, I was in the 3rd row. I was taking notes. And I was thanking God. By 1975, 3 members of my congregation owned franchise locations. Brother Elroy Washington, 31 years old, son of a factory worker, a man who had grown up eating government cheese, was now writing paychecks. 14 employees. Health benefits. A retirement account. I stood in his restaurant on a Thursday afternoon, watching a teenage boy sweep the floor with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned that a job could be taken away. And I felt something that I had not felt in 8 years. I felt like we were winning. That was the feeling. Hold on to it. Because it does not last. The school on Claremont Avenue started sending students to Brother Washington's location every Friday for lunch. I negotiated a discount 20% off for any child with a school ID. 137 children, every Friday, getting a hot meal they could afford. I wrote about it in the church bulletin. I preached about it from the pulpit. I said, this is what the body of Christ looks like. Feeding the hungry. Clothing the poor. Creating wealth in the places where wealth was stolen. The congregation stood up. I genuinely believed every word I said. And then, in the spring of 1981, I received a visit from a regional marketing director. He was a pleasant man. He wore a very good suit. He sat in my office and he placed a folder on my desk and he said, and I am remembering this as precisely as I can, he said, Reverend Calloway, your community trusts you. We want to honor that trust. Inside the folder was a contract. Burger King wanted to sponsor our annual Freedom Sunday celebration. $5,000 in cash, plus a catering arrangement. In exchange, and this is the part I should have read more slowly, in exchange, I would appear in a photograph for their regional marketing materials. I would be identified as community partner. The photograph would run in bulletins distributed at 37 churches across Wayne County. 37 churches. I signed it. I signed it because we needed the $5,000. Because the Reagan administration had just announced cuts to the AFDC program and 3 families in my congregation had lost their assistance. Because I was tired of watching my people choose between the electric bill and dinner. I signed it and I told myself it was stewardship. I told myself, God provides through unlikely instruments. What I did not know, what I refused to know, and there is a difference, was that the photograph would be used not just in church bulletins. It would run in coupon packets distributed on the 1st and 15th of every month. The days the government checks arrived. Everything I just told you is true. Every date. Every dollar amount. Every name. And I need you to sit with that for a moment, with the fact that a man could do everything right, love his congregation without reservation, fight for economic justice with every tool available to him, and still become the instrument of the thing he was fighting against. If something in this story is sitting heavy in your chest right now, just type amen in the comments. Let me know you're here with me. But so is this. There is one document they did not want you to read. It is a memo. Internal. Written by a field marketing officer at a major fast food corporation in 1983. I will not speak his name. But the memo exists. It was analyzed in Drive, Marsha Shondaland's Pulitzer Prize-winning research. The memo referred to black church networks as, and I am quoting directly, the most cost-effective distribution infrastructure for low-income consumer targeting in urban markets. Not partners. Infrastructure. That is what we were. There is something historians have never fully explained. Why did the health crisis not come slowly? It did not come slowly. Between 1990 and 1995, the Michigan Department of Health recorded a 280% increase in cardiovascular mortality and type 2 diabetes onset among black adolescents in Detroit's inner city compared to the suburban communities of Wayne County, less than 12 miles away. 12 miles. The same genetic population. The same climate. 12 miles apart. And the children inside those 12 miles were dying at nearly 3 times the rate. I had been preaching in this city for 27 years by that point. I knew those children. I had baptized some of them. I had watched them grow up eating the food that was, for many of them, the only affordable food within walking distance of their homes. I want to tell you about something that 1 Corinthians 6:19 says. It says, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit?" I had preached that verse 40, 50 times from that pulpit. I used it in sermons about drinking, about drug use, about sexual immorality. I spoke it as a call to holiness. I never once stood up and said, "The French fries are violating the temple." I never once said, "The Happy Meal is a desecration." Not because I did not know. By 1990, I knew. The health literature was available. The studies existed. Drive. Comrade Jones at the CDC had been writing about structural racism in food systems since the mid-1980s. The term food desert had entered the academic literature. I knew. But knowing and preaching are not the same thing. Because if I preached it, if I stood up on a Sunday morning and told my congregation that the food we had celebrated as provision, as survival, as God's mercy in a burned-out neighborhood, if I told them it was killing us, then I had to answer a question I was not ready to answer. Whose fault was it? The corporations who targeted us? Yes. The government that defunded our grocery stores and greenlit our food deserts? Yes. The man who signed the marketing contract and smiled for the photograph? I kept that question in a drawer for 11 years. There is something I have never told anyone. The year before Marcus died, the year before that oak casket, I received another contract offer. This time from the same fast food corporation. A larger arrangement. They wanted to co-sponsor our youth summer program. The amount was significant. I did not sign it. Not because I had become righteous. Because my doctor had, 6 months prior, diagnosed me with type 2 diabetes. I sat in his office on Woodward Avenue, the same street where I had gone to Bible college 30 years before, and he placed a pamphlet on the desk and he said, "Reverend, I need you to look at what you've been eating." I drove home that night and I sat in my car in the church parking lot for 45 minutes. I did not pray. I did not open the Bible. I just sat there in the dark and I thought about the photograph, the marketing materials, the 37 churches. I thought about what the word infrastructure means. Infrastructure is not a partner. Infrastructure is not a community. Infrastructure is what you build on top of. Infrastructure is what bears the weight of the thing being constructed without being asked permission. But wait, there is something historians have hidden for decades. The franchise expansion into black urban neighborhoods was not a response to the 1967 riots. It was planned before them. Internal corporate documents reviewed in the shuttle and research show that McDonald's had identified black urban neighborhoods as high-priority expansion markets as early as 1966. The riots accelerated the timeline. The departure of white-owned grocery chains created the vacancy. The Black Capitalism Initiative provided the political cover. The community did not attract the corporations by being vulnerable. The corporations waited for the vulnerability. 43 people died in the 1967 uprising. Hundreds of buildings burned. And somewhere, in a corporate boardroom, a market analyst updated a spreadsheet. I want you to hold that. Not the corporations. Not the politicians. I want you to hold the pastor who knew who had held the weight of a community's hunger in both hands and chosen the instrument that was offered. Because no other instrument appeared. Because that is the harder question. It is easier to be angry at a corporation. It is harder to sit in a car in a dark parking lot and understand that your signature is on the document. Nothing prepared me for the particular silence of a man who has realized that his faithfulness and his complicity were, for a long time, the same thing. Here is what the historical record shows. Herman Petty's McDonald's on Chicago's South Side did become the highest-grossing location in the region. The National Black McDonald's Operators Association, founded in 1972, did create genuine economic mobility for hundreds of black franchise owners. By 1980, black Americans owned more than 350 McDonald's locations nationwide. Those were real jobs. Real paychecks. Real wealth transferred into real hands. That is true. Also true, by 1995, the density of fast food restaurants in black urban neighborhoods in Detroit was 4 times higher than in white suburban neighborhoods of equivalent income levels. The children growing up within 2 blocks of those restaurants, many of whom had no other affordable food option, were developing obesity-related conditions at rates that would not appear in white communities until a decade later. Both of those things are true simultaneously. And I think that is the most honest thing I can say about what happened here. This was not a simple story of evil corporations targeting innocent people. It was a story of a community that had been systematically stripped of alternatives by redlining, by insurance discrimination, by the orchestrated departure of white-owned capital, and then offered the only option that remained, by the same economic system that had done the stripping. And the church, my church, stood at the intersection of both of those realities. We were the community's most trusted institution. We had survived slavery, survived Jim Crow, survived the riots. We were the place people came to when everything else had failed. And the corporations knew that. They knew it before we did. The Jim Crow of food was not enforced by signs above water fountains. It was enforced by zoning maps and insurance actuarial tables and the strategic placement of 1,400-calorie meals within walking distance of children who had no grocery store within 2 miles. It did not separate by race with a posted sign. It isolated by poverty, by geography, by the quiet withdrawal of every other option until the choice that remained felt like race. If you believe someone you love needs to hear this story today, share this video right now. That's your blessing to give them. What stayed with me most about this history, about all of it, the contracts, the marketing memos, the health statistics, was not the corporate strategy. It was the image of a pastor standing in a restaurant on a Thursday afternoon, watching a teenager sweep the floor, and feeling, for the first time in 8 years, like something was being won. That feeling was real. It was not naive. It was not foolish. It was what hope looks like when it has been deprived of alternatives for long enough. And I think that is the thing worth carrying out of this story. Not rage at the corporations, though that rage is legitimate and earned. But the harder, quieter question: what does it cost a community to survive on the only options it has been permitted to have? Everything you heard today, every date, every name, every document comes directly from the historical record. Franchise: The Golden Arches in Black America by Drive. Marcia Chatelain. Published 2020 by Liverite Publishing, winner of the Pulitzer Prize for History. Records from the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, Washington, D.C. Documents held in the African American collections of the Library of Congress, Washington, D.C. Statistical data from the Michigan Department of Health, 1990-1995. The National Black McDonald's Operators Association Founding Records, 1972. Full links to every source are in the description below. Because this community's story deserves more than assumptions. It deserves the truth. Marcus's mother came to see me 3 weeks after the funeral. She sat in the same chair the Burger King marketing director had sat in. She placed her hands in her lap, very carefully, the way she did when she was choosing her words with precision. She said, "Reverend, I don't blame you." She pressed her thumb against my palm. Just once. She did not say anything else. Neither did I. We had said everything that needed to be said, it just hadn't been said out loud, or by either of us, or in that room. It had been said over 40 years. In every contract signed, every ribbon cut, every prayer offered over a meal that was slowly doing its work. Now you know what I know. So tell me, D-May, the franchise system gave a burned-out community the only economic ladder available. The church had no other choice. Survival is not complicity. Team B, when you weaponize a community's faith and hunger against them, the tool becomes the trap, no matter who holds it. Which side are you on? Drop A or B in the comments below. And tell me why. Because 400 years of this history deserve more than silence. Final beat. Very still, and the oak casket was heavy. Not because I had chosen well. Because I had chosen, and the weight of choosing, when the choices are not yours to make freely, is the oldest burden this country has ever placed on black hands. Rest, Marcus. We are still learning.